Greetings, everyone. It is an absolute pleasure and honor to welcome all of you today. I'm Kanika Radhakrishnan, Program Director of TiE Women Global. Happy to bring you yet another spectacular Connect series event on behalf of the TiE Women Global program. Let me kick off by giving you a quick background on the TiE Women initiative itself. TiE Women was launched as a TiE Global initiative in 2019, and 2020 happened to be our debut year. With the challenges of a pandemic thrown in, we still managed to pull off a spectacular year and conducted our flagship pitch competition and held our grand finale in Dubai in January of 2021. Over 26 winners representing 26 worldwide chapters represented their own chapters at the Dubai finale. And the top three winners walked away with grand prizes in the amounts of $100,000, $25,000, and $10,000 respectively. This year, under the leadership of our two co-chairs, Dharti Arvind Desai, TiE New York President, and Smita Siddhanti, member TiE Global Board of Trustees, our program has grown from strength to strength. This year, the tally of chapters that have onboarded to TiE Women stands at an impressive 46, with representation from as many as 26 countries. Our flagship pitch competition is well underway, and we are poised to host our 46 winners at the GITEX Future Stars event in Dubai in the third week of October. In addition to our pitch competition, we've also launched two other pillars this year, first being the Open Mic Night, which is all about providing early stage women entrepreneurs a safe space to make a pitch in front of mentors in a judgment-free zone and feedback in real time. In addition, we launched the active learning workshops for entrepreneurs of all stages. Last but not the least, we have the Connect series that was started last year to showcase successful women entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs. Tonight, we bring you this spectacular event as part of the Connect series. And we have our hosts for the evening, Smita Bagla and Kanchana Raman, in conversation with Rayman Mathoda. I would like to give a quick introduction on Smita Bagla, who's a member of the Executive Committee for TiE Women and also former president of TiE SoCal. She's also the CEO of Aligned Strategies LLC and managing partner at Amrita Inc. Like I mentioned, she's the immediate past president of TiE SoCal, an active angel investor, board member, and active strategy advisor to multiple startups. With that, over to you, Smita. I'll let you introduce the speaker, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Kanika. And welcome, Rayman and Kanchana. And Kanchana will be assisting me with the question and answers. So the logistics is we'll first have a half an hour. I will be conversing with Rayman for the first 25 to 30 minutes. And then the audience can put their questions on the Q&A section. And my co-host, Kanchana Raman, will be fielding those questions and going ahead, and we finish at 9:45. Thank you so much. So I am delighted to introduce my friend, Rayman Mathoda, from here in Southern California, living very close to me. She has led, as CEO, at least 5 failing companies and transformed them. 4 of them were acquired. And Goldman Sachs acquired one of the companies, Genesis Capital, as a strategic buy to increase their strategic advantage for greater than 100 million. And most recently, she took Xome, Xome, portfolio of companies, a real estate portfolio of companies, through transformation and a $500 million exit. But she doesn't stop there. So currently, she moved on, and with her startup spirit and entrepreneuring with a purpose, and total being a lifelong entrepreneur. She's a partner. She invested and then became founder partner at Emerge Life Sciences, which is again a portfolio of medical and pharmaceutical startups expanding across the globe too. And they do novel, new genomic and therapeutic products in emerging markets, including India and Asia. She has a bachelor's degree from Princeton and a master's from Kellogg. Raymond, really interesting, diverse journey here from fintech, biotech, real estate, mergers and acquisition. Gosh, a real, like you give entrepreneurship a new name, right? Entrepreneuring in life.
That's kind of you, Smita.
So hey, that would be my first question to you. Is how do you describe your journey from being like, is it more like been there, done that, move on to something else, and then something pulling you back? Would you like to describe give our audience a quick snapshot of your journey
Sure, delighted to.
in life?
Delighted to, and thank you so much for having me today. It's my absolute pleasure to speak with this incredible group. I guess the stories of all the different industries, in a way, all sync up through my own internal dialogue and what I was trying to achieve in life. So at a very quick level, I grew up in a family of a lot of doctors in the north of India, in Delhi and Punjab. And so my original focus was life sciences and healthcare. I thought I was going to be a doctor. But I grew up in a government family, and I observed, since my dad was in the the much dreaded IRS in India, he observed, I observed that the economy wasn't growing as much as we wanted to see it grow. This is pre-1992 economic liberalization of India. So really my first foray was to try to study capitalism and entrepreneurship as an engine of economic growth. And that's what brought me to the US, to Princeton and McKinsey and Kellogg and so on and so forth. Along the way, life happened. And what I mean by that is I was successful at McKinsey, but I decided to leave. I thought I was more of a builder and a doer. So when I decided to leave, I thought about what to do. And because of a very uniquely personal circumstance related to my personal status, if you may, as a very untraditional LGBTQ person in the Indian community, I essentially didn't feel able to move to tech in the Bay Area. I had a couple of very close colleagues going over to Google before it IPO'd, but I felt I couldn't move there because that was sort of my family's territory, so to speak. And that brought me into housing. A McKinsey partner pulled me into housing, and that led to a long 20-year run in real estate, mortgage housing, which I really fell in love with. I did not go in with a focus on the sector itself. In fact, I was brought in because I was a quote unquote outsourcing expert. But I very quickly fell in love with the business, learned all dimensions of it. And then when the Great Recession happened, I was so deep in it from a real estate, mortgage, affordable housing standpoint. I dove deeper in and couldn't really, I found myself in that industry and really not able to get jobs or big opportunities elsewhere because my expertise had built up so much. And so I did invest along the way. I was very interested in India, making a contribution to India, being involved in biotech and life sciences in some way. So as I was conducting this mortgage CEO career, I started to invest with some entrepreneurs that I really believed in along the US-India corridor to doing affordable life sciences innovation, leveraging genomics and protein engineering. And so that's sort of and now I'm focused on, I have a secondary focus on, I'll call it mortgage housing as more of a board member. And I've become more of a primary focus in the life sciences arena. I just simply because I see the potential for human impact in that arena is just so massive. So that's sort of
so proud. Your parents will be so proud. If at least you're not a doctor, but you are in the medical forum. I just had to say that because our parents always it is in India, it's you become a doctor or an engineer. So I fainted at the sight of blood, so I became an engineer. But that's very interesting. So, in your journey as, when you, after McKinsey, you took 2 failing companies, that's how you started becoming a turnaround CEO. So would you like to expand that, how you took a couple of failing companies? What are the signs that you saw? How did you pull them up? What is your process? If you could expand on that, because most of our audience here is, if I see the poll, is there are some investors. A lot of them are aspiring entrepreneurs, but a lot of them are current entrepreneurs at this time. So what are the warning signs one should be looking for? What is that? How would one pull themselves out without wanting somebody like yourself, just get mentorship from you, and instead of getting a new CEO, they themselves pull out? I know it's a long question, but could you please help?
It's great. So I'll tell you a little bit of the story of how I even got into this. So, I basically left my, I call it fat cat CXO job at IndyMac, which was one of the big mortgage lenders. And I basically decided to be a social entrepreneur in the 2008 to 12 timeline, because frankly, I felt a moral obligation to help my adopted country, the USA, recover from what was the most horrible recession since the Great Depression.
back in the 1930s. So I basically quit the for-profit sector and became, I'll call it a social entrepreneur. And what that meant was I did whatever I thought I should, going to DC, working with the Obama administration and the Treasury Department on national housing policy, working in the affordable housing arena to try to help people at the lower end of the pyramid, training 20, 30,000 agents, real estate agents, so that they could, because they were the primary interface with consumers, helping literally individual consumers who wanted to avoid foreclosure. So I call this the education I finally paid for with opportunity cost, because I've been, blessed to have various scholarships for all the rest of my education. And so I did all of this social stuff without really thinking about what I was going to do with my career. I was following sort of an instinct and a feeling that I had to make a contribution to the US and the housing sector because of my special level of knowledge on all angles of housing. But in the middle of all of this, my wife and I ended up having 2 sets of twins, 4 bachas, 4 kiddos. And frankly, what ended up happening then was I had an aspiration or a dream to either be super senior in housing, to go change affordable housing and housing at a national level, or my life journey had proven to me that we need to build capital and wealth in our lives to have the power to do anything. And so as I came back to do that, frankly, these entrepreneurs found me. What I'd been doing was I'd been making these speeches and talks at various real estate conferences all across the nation. But having left the corporate sector, the for-profit sector for a few years to do the social stuff, I realized I would have had to take several steps back and move out of SoCal to go take a job at another big company. And that just didn't appeal to me. I wanted to do something new and fresh. And so essentially I had entrepreneurs who found me because of my strategic thinking or entrepreneurial things that I was doing on the ground. They basically came to me, and the failing part, identifying failing companies, was really easy. They were all bleeding cash. Every single one of the companies that I took over was losing a large amount of money, and many of them were in a death spiral where they would lose clients because of underperformance, because of lack of resources, and then you get into sort of this pretty negative cycle in the business. And so really for the first 4, I used to run 2 at a time because the founders came to me. By the way, I don't know that it's a bad thing that they came to me. Because they were still able to retain a majority stake in their businesses. Yes, they had to give me pretty substantial equity and comp in order to get my skill set, but it was actually a pretty great combo. And all of them benefited from exiting with a much healthier business at the end of it.
Awesome.
2 of those ended with Fortune 500 exits. So I'd say it was a pretty win-win, and it was like staring them in the face because they were all losing money and they were desperate for help.
Right. So what are the warning signs? So it was not that I'm saying that they did anything not right in hiring you. It's good to get a strategic partner, right? But what I'm saying is that CEOs, a lot of them are very tech CEOs who are just focused on doing what they are doing. What are the things that as a CEO they should be more aware of so that they don't get into this spiral of underperformance and lack of funds? If they do, I'm glad that they found you and they were able to get it. And at that time, when are the times when the CEO should realize that they should get somebody else like you on board? So that is my question mostly. Sure. I'm really glad these guys got you because you were able to get them multi-million-dollar, like $100+ million exit. So
I think the warning signs were pretty clear. We may have in the tech arena more tech and product oriented CEOs, to your point. The first few that I found were very salesy. They were product, but also salesy. Mm-hmm. So the Uber salespeople, in fact, I learned how to do sales from these founders because they were so incredible at it. But it was everything from the CEOs actually not spending enough time with their teams to truly have a pulse on the organization. And that's across the board: sales, operations, technology, data, etc. And so in both cases, for the first 4 companies, since it was 2 at a time, the entrepreneurs were primarily outward facing salespeople that did not spend as much time with their own internal operations as they spent with sales targets or clients. However, while they were able to sell initially into clients, they were not able to actually deliver strong performance compared to other vendors. And so it was clear they were not the number 1 performing vendor. They were number 2 or 3 or 4. And in many cases, the relative performance relative to the client's expectations was declining. By the way, the one thing I will point out is the entrepreneurs, when I showed up, did not have the right monitoring systems for their companies.
Awesome.
So they did not have the scorecards and the data, the balanced scorecard, MBA types would call it, but simply just, a way to track performance, which drives revenues, to look at operational performance, to look at what you're delivering to your client, and to look at, your fundamental P&L and balance sheet. And so in all cases, they were lacking those data elements. And so they were not in touch with the degradation of revenue and the degradation of client performance. And, you always find the costs were bloated as well. They were mismanaging technology build-outs and projects. And so it was a confluence of a lot of these factors, which were essentially driven by very outward-facing, charismatic salespeople founding companies that they actually did not enjoy and therefore spend the time to really run in an effective way.
Right. So getting the pulse, getting the data, getting the metrics on the company, basically. So a CEO has to be cognizant of that. Means they can't just be in one, we say that focus is necessary for a CEO, but they can't be just tunnel visioned that my product is the greatest or my sales are the greatest and not seeing with the execution. So it's always to have a very balanced team in there, right? So it's like a CEO should be watching, and there are metrics out there that one should do. Like you said, one of them is, how much is metrics on monitoring themselves in terms of the performance metrics, how many sales are going. To keep that vision, a CEO has to be able to see that, or delegate this to somebody who is partnering with them to be able to keep a pulse on it so that they can see they're going. That's very interesting. I bet a lot of people will have questions on that. Guys, keep adding your questions to Q&A. Not guys, sorry, women and men and children who are on. I just totally use the word guys to mean everybody, right? So, so coming up from there is also like, when one is, as you were transforming the companies, did you bring other liaisons, like other companies that partnered with them? What are some of the tactics and the strategies that you used to help these CEOs or these companies to turn around in terms of revenue, in terms of team, in terms of, the product focus? Can you share on that, please?
Absolutely. So the first thing that I would say, Smita, on this one is and maybe I'm obsessed with the data and the numbers, but that control panel was the first thing I had to do every single time. Look at the data that I was getting, whether it's daily, weekly, monthly, and actually develop those data sets to understand what is happening both financially and operationally. And by operations, I mean sales and operations, all other elements that drive the P&L.
Mm-hmm.
And what I realized is once you really start to look at the data and ask the question of how do we affect this number? In every single time, what we assume we need to do is not necessarily what actually needs to be done. Like if you're selling into a large financial institution, what the senior executive tells you on a lunch may not actually be what the people on the ground that are monitoring the vendor relationships and assigning properties or assigning volumes and revenues, that may not be what they're using. So in every single case, the one core was to get underneath the data at a very tangible level, not at the conceptual level, but at the very, peeling the layer back on the onion to figure out what was driving every single layer of it, whether it's on the revenue generation side, on the core COGS or operational side, or whether it's on the corporate overhead and technology project side. Yeah. In most cases, I would say I worked with the people that were there because that was the fastest way to impact the business. I was very selective about bringing outsiders in because I found that it's much easier, especially when you've got to get something done very quickly. It actually breaks down trust to bring people from the outside to save something. And what I found is it doesn't really matter whether you have fancy college degrees in the talent that you already have at the company or whether you have people that have just been in the business and know the day-to-day of the business. But I spent a lot of time building deep relationships and understanding the motivations of the talent that was at the company, again, much more than the original founders had. and found a way to motivate each of those people to go above and beyond, to protect their job, to save the ship. I always use the ship analogy. Our ship is leaking. We've got to stop the leaks so that we can have a safe space to make a journey. And so building those trust and relationships, starting internally and then going externally and layering that into the clients was very important. I will mention that I have found many times technology projects gone wrong were one of the things that were exacerbating a lot of the problems at the companies. And in that case, I did have to bring in, there's a vendor that I know, a company that I've worked with for many years that is a hybrid US-Indian operation out of Arizona, guys that I know and trust, that I know are not going to bullshit me. And so what I find is a lot of tech vendors are able to bullshit salespeople, sales founders. And so I needed my trusted folks to come in and, in some cases, take over the project. In one case, we didn't even have a copy of our own software, and the vendor was threatening to have our system go down. So we had to come in the night and take a copy of our own software by bringing in this trusted team. So on the technology and data arena, I have had to bring people in that I trust, that I know will do the right job on time, on budget, because that's the area that becomes very difficult to control if we have a bad relationship.
Right. I totally understand what you're saying. Data is so important. As I also act as interim CXOs for startups, and also am an executive advisor to corporations. So one of the companies that I was helping with during the start of the pandemic, they got really excited because they offered free services, and their subscribers grew to 1 million people, free subscribers. But they didn't look at, so they got excited and they started providing more features. But I had to stop them, say, let's see how many conversions do you get. The moment the 6 months was over, the conversion rate fell down to less than 5%. So see 1 million subscribers and you don't even have 500 users that came out of it. So data is extremely important. I totally understand. And startup entrepreneurs should be they should pay attention to this kind of a data. And there are a lot of metrics. One should say they should always have a dashboard. Everybody should invest in a dashboard. Like a Google Analytics is the most basic dashboard they go to. And I totally understand that. And having trusted partners, yes. If you don't have your own trusted team, then maybe it's good to have somebody that you trust who has a trusted team to bring in their people, because they have been through it much more. So love those learnings from you, Raymond. This is really, really, really spot on. So thanks for sharing that. And so are there any other gotchas in all this? This is, okay, your company is not doing as well or not progressing as fast as you want. And so you find somebody. What is the process on choosing somebody to partner with you, bringing them on? And what are the things that you should be aware of a little bit as to what? So there's some gotchas that you can share that one should be aware of, that you know of.
Absolutely. I mean, look, the big gotcha is just, it's really hard to find good business partners. It's really, really difficult. I think that's one of the most important and biggest core challenges of any company or team, is truly finding those people at the top with the chemistry and the trust to be able to do something. In my cases, for the first several startups, and then I ended up going to some more institutional companies like Zoom, one very simple thing I would just say is, recognize that things will change as the business changes, and don't do a deal on a handshake, actually, is what I would say. And I'm the opposite of that. I tend to shake a hand and my word is my honor, and that's it. But I think what I would share with folks, anybody who comes into a circumstance like this in particular, is make sure that you lock in what your understanding is when you're coming into the company in a very clear way, and do have a lawyer look at that and make it enforceable. I had some challenges on that front. Even when I had something documented, I hadn't had a lawyer look at it. And so I did run into some challenges there. And one of the things I just observed is, it's just human nature. When the circumstance is terrible, your business is losing, 10, 20, 30% of revenues, you're bleeding cash, you have capital issues, there's a certain appetite that you have to attract somebody. and I'm speaking from the position of, from my role. Now, when the business is turned around, and by the way, that could be pretty fast, 12, 18 months, 24 months. Once your business is stable and it's making money, your whole perception of that person who came in changes. They don't seem as important and as relevant. And so I think what I would say is recognize that when it feels good and people really need you, that's a temporary thing, based on the environment. And when it's the opposite, when people don't feel like they need you anymore, that's normal too. And so understand that reality will shift and change, and plan for that upfront, I think would be one of the big gotchas.
And it may change next day again. They would love you and they can't do without you. So it is something, don't invest yourself into their liking. That's my failing a lot, but into their liking and not liking, what you're bringing is good.
And the other part of it is, figure out if it's a short-term relationship or a long-term relationship, right?
Exactly.
I knew for some of the ones that I did, that I knew it was going to be a short-term relationship. These were people I was going to go work with for a moment in time, and then we were going to exit. And so I think having that concrete plan that is thought through is important, because that frames the whole relationship and how both sides view it.
Right. And it's like, start with a 6-month relationship first, see if it works out, have an exit clause for both of them, and you plan to deliver something for them, and then see how it goes more. Means I know I've been there and I've learned from my experiences. Yeah. So it's like 6 months or more, depending upon renewing and stuff. So that is big. One more thing I just want to, get your opinion on is, a lot of times CEOs or other people, like, the people that I advise, also think, now I've gotten this person, they are so great, they're going to transform us, we don't have to do anything, as if they're carrying the magic bullet. No. How hard the CEOs and the people also have to work, and the team, just share your thoughts on it a little bit. I just want to emphasize that to our audience here, if it's okay.
You know what? That's a phenomenal one you brought up. Actually, the truth is, nothing great can be achieved without it being about teamwork and multiple people working together in their respective capacities. The old adage that the fist is much stronger than a single finger or a bunch of different fingers. And so I echo what you just suggested, Smitha, which is that just because I had come in did not mean that the founders and CEOs did not have important roles to play. And in some cases, they retained chairwoman or chairman, they retained titles. It's not like they left the business. They were right there with me. In one of my startups, I had this phenomenal, I think the best salesperson I've ever met, literally could sell ice to an Eskimo. He had 2 private planes. And he would go fly to all the different clients without having to worry about commercial flights, and like the biggest, best schmoozer ever. And part of what I needed him to do, while I turned around the core of the operation using data and operations and technology, is I needed him to go keep the clients. So we had the time to turn things around. So very much, I think keeping the original founder, often what I find is the people at a company are, especially in founder-led small to mid-sized companies, there's a huge amount of equity tied up in that founder relationship and founder presence. So I think really making that extremely clear from the very beginning and assigning the appropriate roles based on whatever the circumstance of the company is. So it is a divide and conquer with regular communication becomes super key. And I would say that the founders of the companies that I joined in always played a substantial role in the end result that we got. I would not take all the credit by any stretch of the imagination.
Interesting. It means absolutely. It means you were the catalyst. It's best to think of you as the catalyst, a major catalyst, but still the catalyst initially to make it happen. And then once you got the processes and everything going and you were leading them, it happens. And that's how you lead it into transformational. So we had talked about your interesting diverse journey, right? From fintech, real estate to biotech. And you were at McKinsey leading healthcare and pharmaceutical the practices and advising the clients. So now you have come full circle into being a partner at the US India Corridor for Emerge. Can you share a little bit about it, like about the Med Genome? That's like a $300 million effort, and others, if you don't mind.
No, it's been phenomenal, actually. So these companies were founded by a couple of people that I knew, tech entrepreneurs who grew up, actually born and brought up in India, but then came up to the Bay Area and created some tech and software companies. And what happened was these guys wanted, they have a social thing. They want to make a difference for the nation. They want to help people. Nobody came from very rich backgrounds. Everybody came from very simple means. And, it's not just about making a shit ton of money. It's also about creating a shit ton of impact. So these couple of tech entrepreneurs essentially came to me, and they basically said, look, we think this is like, circa 2010, 11, 12. They said, with the advent of genomics, where, a single human, my genome, your genome, has 3 billion data points, literally 3 billion data points. And so they said, with the advent of genomics, we believe tech has come into biotech, and technology and data skills are now inherent to conducting the genomics business. And we think we would like to start this business in India. We want to take this business to India. So, and we'd like to make it, the amazing vision and promise of personalized medicine available to people, not only in India, but people in emerging markets at the lower half of the pyramid. And so look, as somebody who'd grown up in India, had grown up in Punjab, that really resonated with me. And so the first company that was started back in 2013 was MedGenome. It actually was part of an incubator first. They set up an R&D facility. The guy who was one of the founders, Sam, set up an R&D facility where he purchased the first Illumina machines in India to even develop the expertise, bringing in US people and really taking folks that were studying genomics in India and creating that expertise. And then out of that was spun MedGenome with a focus on human genomics, which is now, as you suggested, raised well over 100 million of venture capital, and is now India's leading a genomic diagnostics business and genomics research business. And then the rest of the R&D incubator was turned into a plant and animal genomics company called AgriGenome, where the thought process was there's tremendous ability to innovate in plants and animals leveraging genomics, but we don't want Indian farmers. There was all this talk about farmer suicides and all of that. We don't want Indian farmers to be subject to the economic constraints of a global market. We want there to be made in India seeds that are non-GMO, that are dramatically better than what was there before. And we think there's a business case to do this. And so the guy started MedGenome. I was a founding investor in MedGenome, loved what they did with MedGenome, and invested in AgriGenome. Then they came to me and they said, you know what, we also think we can do drug development because this is the era of protein engineering. And so we think we might be able to, in certain areas of known biology where the mechanism of action of a drug is very well understood, for instance, with anti-VEGFs, which make a big impact on adult blindness, we think we might be able to make a drug at 70, 80, 90% lower cost than Western pharma by developing it in India. And if we succeed, it's a very high risk venture, by the way, most drugs don't make it, but if we succeed, it could be a game changer. And if we figure out a model that works, this could be then scaled across multiple other drug areas. And so that again, and we realize that 95% of the people in India are not able to access the anti-VEGF class of drugs that I just mentioned. In fact, there's a few drugs out there, and the best one is not even available in India. The most expensive, best drugs are often not even offered in emerging markets because they're not affordable. And so I just became a bigger and bigger investor because I was both seeing business building traction and I was seeing the potential for social impact. In the middle, they did a rice experiment and created 10,000 varieties of a kind of samba masuri, which is very famous in South India. And we got one variety that was 30 or 40% more productive, which gives 30 to 40% more rice for the same amount of land and water resources. Wow. And so these are the stories that got me convinced that, this set of enterprises could really not only create a bunch of enterprise value, they've created about, call it 500-600 million of enterprise value in the last 7 or 8 years. But we think if the stuff actually works and we push it, and by the way, we don't think it'll just work by itself because the capital sources, the entrepreneurial talent, there's a lot that needs to develop in the ecosystem, but the stakes and the prize is so big, even in the sense of just helping millions of people, that I felt compelled that I should, have a real estate career, achieve a certain amount of success, and then I should graduate out of that, to really dedicate myself to this cause along the US-India corridor and to doing it through a for-profit framework.
Entrepreneurship with a purpose. And with that, I'd like to invite my co-host Kanchana Raman to come and lead the question and answer session with you. Kanchana is, can I just give a quick intro on you, Kanchana, if you don't mind? She's also a member of our TiE Women Executive Committee. She's the past president of TiE Atlanta, and she's in the telecom business. She has multiple companies in there, and currently she's the president of Avion Networks. And she is also very passionate about women's success in general, but about all entrepreneurs' success. So Kanchana, to you.
Thank you, Smita. Raymond, again, on behalf of TiE Women and TiE Global, our parent organization, welcome and thank you for those amazing insights you shared with us. I think there was no filter and I just love it. So I know you're very committed to the LGBTQ community. What improvements would you like to see be made in the future?
Oh, wow. Thank you for that question, Kanchana. That one's really, near and dear to my heart. One of the things that I've realized, especially with the South Asian diaspora, and I know TiE is not only for South Asians, but I'll just mention that diaspora since I belong to it, is that the needle is not moving quickly enough, essentially. Our cultures, our families, our communities are not really accepting our LGBTQ family members and loved ones the way that they should. I am not seeing that acceptance in Punjab, or where I'm from. And one of the things I've realized in connecting and speaking with some of the folks in the diaspora is nobody's out of the closet. What essentially happened in our South Asian diaspora is, even for somebody like me who is out of the closet, the reality becomes that you don't become super public about it, which, by the way, I am changing because I feel like people like me have to change that to create representations that are new and different and realistic out there. But what I've really realized is somebody in our extended families doesn't know, and we're so family oriented, or somebody in our family who knows that we really love is in the closet. And because of that, I feel that all of the most of the very highly prominent South Asians just simply don't come out of the closet. And that could be the L's, the G's, the B's, the T's, anyone. And so I think we need to have the conversation about this. And ironically, in South Asia, my understanding is that the British, it's really the British who brought this very, very conservative way of thinking where LGBTQ people are not treated appropriately. Certainly, when you look at the ancient temples in many parts of India, you do see representations of same-sex individuals or different individuals. And those people have been a part of Indian society. So I just feel like we need to do a whole lot more. And I've decided I'm going to go out and probably write a memoir and do a lot more speaking and talking to expand awareness. And I think that needs to happen across the diaspora, because the only way to change hearts and minds, which is what needs to be done, is by everyone knowing who in their community is LGBTQ. When you realized you have a loved LGBTQ person, and then you meet other people who are okay with their LGBTQ people, that is what normalizes and creates acceptance. And I think that's very much missing and necessary in our community now. The laws have just now started to catch up. In the US, we've made very good progress over the last couple of decades. In India, we've made okay progress. There was a lot of back and forth, but now for the first time in 2018, the Indian Supreme Court has said LGBTQ peoples are normal. This is natural. They deserve dignity and grace and our support. And there's even now support for transgender humans that has come in, although it's a little challenging. There's a lot of gap between what the court said and the way things are being implemented, which is not as supportive of the transgender individuals. For instance, if you have to register as a transgender individual, that already creates an environment of bias. And that is the way things are being implemented. So I do think more needs to be done on the policy front, although we've already made some good advances, but a whole lot more needs to be done on the cultural front. And I hope to do and make that a bigger focus over the next few years.
Thank you, Raymond, for being that voice. I think it's important, and thank you for your commitment towards the LGBTQ community.
Thank you,
Kanchana. And so with that, we have a few audience questions. And so I think there's two things. One is you've been talking about entrepreneuring in life and entrepreneurship with purpose. So maybe if you can expand, what do you mean by that?
Sure. I guess when I say entrepreneuring in life, I think, when we think entrepreneur, we think somebody who starts a startup, starts something from scratch and builds it up into something. And I guess I sort of think about entrepreneurship in an even broader sense. I think about it as going against the grain, doing something different than what the mainstream is doing, and seeing something that doesn't exist. And so when I say entrepreneuring in life, in some ways, when I was growing up in India, I was allowed by my very progressive family to be a swimmer. I was a national level swimmer. And I thought that was entrepreneurial of them, to allow somebody from a highly educated family, like everybody in my family was like, how could you do this? She's doing sports. She should be studying to be a doctor or an engineer. It started from sort of there. And then my father,
So Raymond, from being an engineer and doctor, you didn't do that bad with Princeton. Let me just leave it out there.
That's right. That's right. But, coming to Princeton was something different, right? Back in the day, early 90s, I was lucky enough to get a scholarship to come. But the truth is there weren't very many of us there. And so really learning about capitalism, and I hope, capitalism is now rife in India. You see tons of startups, you see, a lot of activity, but I do hope that we are able to sort of shape the capitalism in a direction that makes it more equal and creates, even more social good by reducing the level of inequality that we're seeing nowadays in some of the outcomes.
So that is entrepreneurship with purpose.
So that was sort of, entrepreneuring in life, meaning do something different. Even my decision to come out as an LGBTQ person versus going back and sort of, frankly, I had a whole life plan that would have been much easier and more comfortable that I could have pursued. But the decision to kind of live your truth, follow your instinct, follow your nose is sort of just how I expand the tent on the definition of entrepreneurship. In terms of entrepreneuring with purpose, what I mean by that is, my entrepreneurship has always had sort of an agenda to it. There's always been sort of a goal or a reason that made me an entrepreneur. First, I became an entrepreneur, and I'll focus on the business side of it. Really, I became a social entrepreneur to help the USA recover from the Great Recession, which was a massive housing recession. So I became an entrepreneur really by quitting my job and just jumping into the fray to say, I'm going to show up in DC, I'm going to show up to the local meetings, I'm going to show up to the bank, the conferences and all of that to see what I can do to make a difference. And then I became an entrepreneur in housing, really with an agenda to achieve a certain public policy goal, which is it's always been my goal to try to convert a lot of the foreclosures and defaults that we have in the US into affordable housing. So I always had sort of an agenda there. And I also had a personal agenda around achieving a certain level of success so I could come off and be an entrepreneur on an even larger scale, the global scale, the life sciences arena. And that was guided by the purpose of trying to bring medicines, diagnostics, to people who couldn't afford them. So that's sort of what I mean by entrepreneuring with a purpose. And I always find when people are purpose-driven, and this, by the way, reverberates into the transformational journeys as well, taking over an underperforming company, often people have lost their sense of purpose. And so really thinking deeply about why are we here? What do we do? And how does that help the community or the people or the country? I find is a great way to both center yourself and also motivate people to go above and beyond in a way that they just won't do for the brass tacks, for the paycheck, and so on and so forth.
So Raymond, you said when you were a social entrepreneur, you were working with the Obama administration, so were you going back and forth to DC? What was that journey like?
Yeah, that was a really unusual journey too. President Obama was coming into office back in 2008 when I decided that I have a moral obligation because I've gone basically for free to both Princeton and Northwestern, and I have this incredible life that I couldn't have anywhere. And I thought, oh my God, this country has enabled this for me. Now I know a lot about this problem that this country is facing. I got to go jump in the fray. And so what ended up happening was I got lucky. It turned out that my McKinsey mentor, who now runs a nonprofit, was leading President Obama's transition into office from a McKinsey standpoint. He was leading a McKinsey project that was doing that. And then I happened to meet somebody here in Los Angeles who are friends with the Obamas and very well acquainted with the Black Caucus and very well trusted by the Black Caucus, which is a very powerful political group, as well as the administration. So I was able to put together the support network that I have in my life, not take a job in the Obama administration. I was offered a job at Treasury, but it didn't pay enough to even pay for one baby, let alone four. But I was able to leverage all these connections to, frankly, just open doors at the White House, at the Treasury Department, at Fannie and Freddie and HUD, and get in there to make proposals about how things could be better.
That's awesome. So we have so many questions. I'm just going to ask maybe one or two. At what stage do you think founders can bring a strategic partner, or at what stage you entered into startups? How much equity you suggest founders can give to strategic partners or mentors?
So the answer on this one is it completely varies based on what you are looking for and why. So usually I would say entrepreneurs that I've seen bring in people that they need to bring in to achieve a certain vision. And if you bring somebody in as a partner at the founding, as you know, that's a very different equation. Often you're equal, or you come up with a split based on the value add at the very beginning. Whereas once you have a functioning enterprise, you may not have to give somebody, if you're just paying somebody a good cash number and they're just an advisor putting in a little bit of time, all the way to you may have to pay them a lot more. In my case, I felt that, like a 10% stake was not completely out of the ordinary. It's still only 10% of 100% stake. But something in the range. So I think the high end, when you bring in somebody to a company that's already operating and is not completely fresh, the high end is in that 10, maybe even 20% range, depending on the size of the enterprise. But you can also get away with numbers much lower. In one of my companies, I just had a few percent, less than 5%. I think it was like maybe 3%. And that was a company which had a large amount of capital commitment from a private equity firm. And so the dynamics in that were different. I had a lot of capital to play with, 250 million of capital to deploy. And so the stake there was much lower. So it really varies a lot by what your level of need is, how much, how severe that need is, who that person is, what their life circumstances are. And some of it just boils down to negotiation.
Yeah. So Raymond, I think one last question. You said that, many times, as a turnaround CEO, entrepreneurs are bleeding cash and not in a debt spiral. By the time they figure these things out, I'm sure a few quarters have passed by or even years. What would you suggest for entrepreneurs to be on top of their game so that, they're not looking for a turnaround CEO at the end of it?
I think, honestly, if you're measuring and monitoring your P&L, and this was a weakness at multiple of the places I showed up, not every single time, but in at least a couple of the places, I should say one particular that comes to mind, the financials were not good. The accounting was weak. It was not timely. It was happening very slow. The numbers were coming in a month or two later. There was no standard format. There was no QC process. The company was so busy selling and operating, it hadn't taken the time to actually have good financial reporting. And so I would say at a minimum, have good financial reporting. Ideally have good operating performance metrics as well, because there's always something far upstream that usually affects those financials, whether it's revenue or cost or whatever. And so ideally you should have both the financial metrics, and they can be very simple. It doesn't have to be a million things. It can be 10 financial metrics and 5 or 10 key operational metrics.
Can you maybe name one, or maybe top 3 financial metrics?
I mean, the simplest ones would be, units closed, if there's a unit metric, revenues generated, expenses, both fixed and variable, and profits, EBITDA, EBIT. Simplest one is EBIT. If your EBIT is negative, you're in trouble. When your EBIT is low, so if you had a positive EBIT, these companies have gone from positive profitability into negative. Simply tracking that and acting more quickly could have changed the game. But I think people weren't ready to act, right? They were already taking actions, but those actions were inadequate. And by the time I got in, things were pretty bad. But I think if you're monitoring those very simple metrics, you should be able to know where things are and take action much more quickly.
That's awesome. Raymond, congratulations to you and your wife for raising 4 beautiful kids. Most of us are parents here, and we know it's a tall order. And thank you for sharing your life journey with us. It's just been a truly remarkable 45 minutes, and we have tons and tons of questions. And we know we cannot go through all of them, but thank you to the audience again. And Smita, if you have any closing comments, I think I have one invitation for you from our chair, Dusty Desai. She's like, please invite Raymond to the Dubai conference. So you have an invitation from us. So we would be honored if you can join us.
Thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, Kanchana. Thanks for the questions, and thanks, Raymond, for the awesome answers. And yes, we have 1,000+ startup for TiE women right now cohort, and I think you would love most of them. A lot of them are entrepreneurship with a purpose, as well as social entrepreneurs. They would do a lot with your guidance.
Oh, I would love to make it if I can. We should definitely take that offline. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, totally. We would love to take you on that. And one thing I wanted to share, like I know Dharti shared with you, that TiE Global is in 14 countries, but TiE women, startup entrepreneurs are in 26 different countries.
I love it.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Raymond. And our next TiE Women series would be on September 29th with an awesome speaker, entrepreneur speaker from Dubai. So please tune in for that. And thanks everyone for attending. We really appreciate your being here. If you have any more questions for Raymond, you can email it to us at TiE Women and we would forward them to Raymond. Thank you, Raymond, for being part of
My
our group.
pleasure. Happy to take any questions. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks.